Lokati here. Today we're going to talk about how to craft temple gloves. And so the first thing we're going to talk about is how to craft budget temple gloves. Part of that craft is going to be finding temple gloves. Now, realistically, if we're looking for a budget, we're looking for two things. We are looking for increased damage with hits against chilled enemies, crit strike against shocked, or added fire against burning enemies. Because we can use our harvest bench to change this over to what we want, and to re-roll the range that it has within the roll. Next thing we're going to look for is total attack speed, and if you're going to be using an aspect or an unveil, an empty suffix. Finally, you can adjust the search if you don't want an unveil or an empty suffix to include elemental resistances or chaos resistances, and we don't want to buy gloves that have increased attack speed as an implicit. Now you can uncheck this. Just make sure you manually look at them and make sure that they haven't put that on there, because that's going to change the total attack speed here. And in fact, we can make this a little bit easier for the search for people, since I'll share the search with you. We can make this, instead of total attack speed, we can just make it a flat increased attack speed, and that removes the need for having that not in there. And so you'll do a search and you'll find that there are currently 12 gloves that fit this roll. Now, looking down these gloves, there's a bunch of choices. They range currently between 2 to 15 div. So you would ideally want to be looking at cheaper ones. The base on the gloves is not critical for any of my builds, because we're not running a lot of armor ES on these gloves. The only caveat here is, if you want suppression on your gloves, it has to be a fractured base. It's impossible to get suppression on a suffix with any reasonable budget. And so we'll look at these gloves. These are great gloves. Max attack speed roll, temple mod on the back of it, and then an open suffix. So we can either put aspect of the spider, aspect of the cat, or an unveil on there. Now when we go back to our hideout, the first thing that you're going to want to do is go ahead and start reforging this over. Now, eye level is mostly important, mostly unimportant on gloves, but you do want to keep an eye on the eye level. But if it has T1 speed and a temple mod, it's going to be high enough eye level to get almost all the other mods on it that you're going to want on the gloves anyway. So to do this, we just reforge resistances. And so it is currently a fire res, fire damage against burning enemies. We go fire to cold right here. And then we see we got 30% increased damage with hits against chilled enemies. Well, we don't like that. So we go back to fire, and then we go back to cold. And we got 30 again. Go back to fire. Go back to cold. We got 41. And you can go back and forth and do this as many times as you want to within the budget that you have set for yourself to get a high roll on damage against chilled enemies. Now, 50% is obviously the highest roll and is harder to get a hold of than something like in the 45 to 50 range. But you want to do this. You don't have to do this immediately before you start crafting on the gloves. You can do this later on down the road. So if you get a 45 now and you're like, that's good enough for right now, we just keep it. We're done. We don't have to do anything else. And so that puts us in a good position. Now, if you want on the gloves to unveil a third modifier on the suffix, your only choice here is going to be add one more prefix, which you can do by just blocking suffixes and exalting it one time. And so I'll show you what that looks like here. You add one more suffix to block, and so we'll just block like whatever. And then we come over here, and I don't have an exalted arm. That's fine. You exalt it, and then you craft suffixes cannot be changed. When you craft suffixes cannot be changed, it removes the can be crafted suffix modifier on here. So we'll come over here, we'll go to craftifexile.com, and you should always test everything before you start doing stuff. So we come over here, and these are our gloves. Now we exalt it to add one more mod to it, and then we craft suffixes cannot be changed. That's going to replace our other suffix crafted mod. Now we have an empty suffix and filled prefixes. When we're at this point, we veiled exalted orb this. You could veiled chaos this, But if it re-rolls the veil on the prefixes, you then have to undo that veil and redo it again. And that's gonna hit your well, actually, then you would have to suffixes cannot be changed again. There are situations where you could try using a veiled chaos orb. It's a gamba, maybe it's cheaper, maybe it's more expensive. Veiled exalted orb just guarantees it. This guarantees that we get a suffix because it's going to remove the prefix suffixes cannot be changed, and it's going to remove or re-roll our other prefixes, and it's going to guarantee a suffix mod. So we do this, we get a veiled suffix. Now, once we get a veiled suffix here, unfortunately, we don't have any way to block anything. So whatever we get is what we get. You can only block with an open affix. And since we're closed affixes already, you unveil and you take whatever you get. Now, this one rolled 27% increased critical damage if you dealt a critical strike recently. That's a good one. Other than that, the Dex and Int, that's not ideal. You could unveil. There's the crit again. There's damage with non-ball skills during a solo. No one cares about that. This 47% increased attack cast speed is ideally what you want. You've got like a 1 in 3 of just hitting that. And so it's not a great chance, but it is a chance. Alternatively, you can always beastcraft on something like aspect of the spider or aspect of the cat on that suffix. You can also just exalt the suffix, or when you're doing your search for temple gloves out here, instead of empty suffix, we can come in here and say maybe we want a minimum of some Eli-Res or Chaos Res on the gloves. And so we come down here and we're going to just sort by weighting. And you can see you can get some gloves that have decent mods on them already. Now, if we have a budget, we can always scroll down and look for stuff that fits our budget here. Here's a 7-div version. This has cold res on it, along with the increased attack speed and the damage with hits against shield enemies. And then we would need the empty prefix here so that we can, suffixes cannot be changed, reforge life. Which is where we're at. Once you get the gloves to this point, and you're at a point where you're ready to do suffixes, or prefixes, we just do suffixes cannot be changed, which are already on here, because the Veiled Exalted Orb doesn't remove that, unlike the Veiled Chaos Orb. And suffixes cannot be changed. Come over here to Harvest, and we're going to Harvest Reforge Life. Harvest Reforge Life is going to give us a life mod. If it's a bad life mod, suffixes cannot be changed again. Now that we have filled suffixes, we can beastcraft. Suffixes cannot be changed. And beastcrafting suffixes cannot be changed is very cheap. It's like 60 chaos right now. So suffixes cannot be changed because we have filled suffixes. And then we'll Harvest Reforge Life. And we'll do this again and again until we get what we want. Now, you can't brick your gloves with this because if you fill, we can always Eldritch craft, which is Eldritch. We need to hit it with an Ember first so that it has the highest tier implicit, being Searing Exarch. And then we can use an Eldritch Annul to rip off a prefix, because Eldritch Annul only removes prefixes if Searing Exarch is dominant. And so if it fills, we can do that. And then we can suffixes cannot be changed. And we can come back over here and we can Harvest Reforge Life. And then we get our T2 life here. Now, once you get your T2 life, you can do one of two things. But most of the time, you're just going to exalt for something good. And then benchcraft on increased damage while leeching. That exalt could be anything in the world. And then if you're being really picky on your gloves, you can Eldritch craft on and off with a null and exalts. And if you rip your life, you can then Harvest Reforge Life. Depending on the cost of Eldritch currency, there is a small chance that it could be cheaper to use Eldritch Chaos Orbs or Exalted Orbs and Eldritch Nulls to try to get the life back on. But it's highly unlikely that you're going to have a cheaper experience than just doing a Wild Bristle Matron and Harvest Reforge Life. And that'll get you gloves that kind of look like this. We have a great damage against chilled enemies. We have increased attack speed. We have a T1 or T2 life. And we have our damage while leeching. These are incredibly strong gloves. An alternative is crafting Warlord's Frenzy gloves, and realistically, those gloves are less damage than this glove set. If you don't hit your Veil, my advice would be to finish crafting the gloves, put them up for sale, buy another set of gloves, start recrafting on them. Trying to rip the third suffix off is never, never, never worth it. Now, another way that you can craft these gloves is fracture crafting. Either self-fracture or buy fractured cold res, damage against chilled enemies, and now we have complete control over the suffixes. Now, in this case, we're going to start this off with Essence Zealing. Zeal is an 18% attack speed, so that's better than the 16% base that we can get on the gloves. And then you're going to Zeal to a final suffix that you prefer, or, again, we always have the option of suffixes cannot be changed, and then Veiled Exalted Orb. Now, since we have a fractured cold res chilled enemies, and we have an 18% increased attack speed that we can guarantee that we hit, it's very unlikely that Veiled Exalted Orb is going to be the best way to go. We're probably better off, or we're probably cheaper just using a Veiled Chaos Orb in this situation. With suffixes can't be changed, you've got a high likelihood of it hitting a Veiled suffix for the total cost of Veiled Chaos Orbs versus Exalted Orbs. And again, same thing here. We're going to go ahead and unveil this. We're looking for increased attack and cast speed while focused, which has a great chance of rolling on here. And then we're back to the exact same craft as we were before, which is suffixes cannot be changed via a wild matron, and then harvest reforged life until you get a good life. Once you get a good life, exalt it, and then benchcraft on leeching. And then you would be done with these gloves. There are obviously alternatives to this setup, and there's alternative ways to get different affixes on these gloves. You can go with armor evasion gloves instead of the cheapest gloves that are out there, and then you can exalt craft with Eldritch crafting to get a high tier life modifier in addition to a high armor, high evasion modifier, things like that. But this will get you started and going in the right direction. If you have any questions over anything, come by Twitch. I'm happy to answer them. I can help with crafting or guide you in crafting. It is an important part of knowledge that you need to have if you want to be successful in POE. Thank you very much for watching. Y'all have a wonderful day. Peace.